Hello and welcome to the Peace Talk, this time with Phill Gittins. My name is Josef Mühlbauer. I'm an university assistant at the University of Graz, an author, publisher of several books and scientific articles. And today I have the great privilege to introduce to you Phill Gittins. Phill is the Education Director of World Beyond War. He is not only a peace practitioner with over 20 years of experience, but also a peace scholar. He is active in delivering workshops and lectures around the world and has published several books, chapters, and journal articles. He earned a PhD in international conflict analysis, and Phill also holds a postgraduate qualification in peace and conflict studies in education, training and teaching in higher education. Dear Phill, I thank you very much that you followed my invitation for this Peace Talk.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Let us begin with the first question. How would you describe your work and what is peace education actually?
So there's many things to our work, what we do at World Beyond War and what we do in particular within the education department. But in broad brush strokes, the idea is to try and make a contribution and move us away from a culture of war and violence and more towards a culture of peace and non-violence. That is one broad way of summing it up. Of course, there's lots more to it, but I think that's a useful starting place. And then I assume within the conversation, we can kind of unpack that a little bit more. So with regards to the role of peace education, I think that is a core part, maybe the raison d'etre of peace education is how can we use education as a tool to help us move away from the current dominant culture of war and militarism and violence, the things that we don't want, towards the things that we do want, such as a culture of peace and non-violence and cooperation, collaboration. Collaboration, cooperation, and things like this, and a culture of peace are not just necessary for bringing about peace and security, they're necessary for bringing about progress. And that includes progress on everything from life, quality of life, through to health, prosperity, sustainability, etc. So hopefully that gives a bit of a quick kind of introduction.
And how would you describe your work? So you are teaching younger people, or yeah, and what is your, for example, training courses? How can we imagine that?
Yeah, well, so within World Beyond War, we have kind of three strands to our work. One is education, action, and communication. I said them separately, but of course, in practicality, what we need to do, and this has implications for the field as well, is get much better at weaving together education and action, study and practice, learning and activism, etc. So what we try to do in World Beyond War is try to blend them. So when we do that in a number of different ways, we can do that in person with workshops, lectures, trainings, and also we have online courses as well, which people join. And these are quite popular because people join from all around the world. And I have this lovely saying, it's really nice within World Beyond War that we get a real great mix of people on our courses. The youngest that I know of is 13. The oldest that I know of is 94. So it's a real intergenerational, exactly what life should be like, you know, learning together, a learning laboratory. People from very different backgrounds, right from students, activists, right up to PhD professors, learning together. And of course, if you think of traditional schooling at university, it's not like that. You know, we're okay, 9 till 10, we're thinking in psychology, 11 till 12, we're thinking in sociology. Life's not like that. What life is about and what peace building should be about is kind of a problem posing approach, looking at an issue and thinking through together what are the best tools, what are the best disciplines, theories, concepts, ideas that we can use, you know, to address these issues. So this is what we do within World Beyond War. We have our online courses and they cover different topics, but very broad, ranging from pro-peace and anti-war, and I can say something more about that if that would be of interest, what we mean by that. And then we have, you know, specific courses such as War in the Environment has just finished last week, and our new course, which has started yesterday, is called unarmed civilian defense. One of the things that we often get within World Beyond War, the World Beyond War community, and we started in 2014 at World Beyond War, and now we tens of thousands of individuals and organizations around the world in over 202 countries have signed our peace pledge. We have affiliates, chapters, partners that we work with in many different places, and over 3,000 alumni in all this work, and broadly the broader global movement to end all war. One of the big questions that we always get is probably one of the most important questions that Peace Field could get, and sometimes one of the most often overlooked questions that the Peace Field, which is ironic, does not address fully. What can ordinary people do when militaries attack? What options do they have? You know, so this is what our new course, Unarmed Civilian Defense, attempts to answer that question, and do so not in a theoretical way, but in a practical, scientific-based way, drawing from lots and lots of research that shows non-violent action works, civil resistance works. It protects us, it protects communities, and it protects nations a lot better, and the planet a lot better than ever military or armed struggles can ever do. So this is our latest course, and we've got over 100, the last time I checked yesterday, about 145 signed up on that course from around the world.
Sounds absolutely amazing and very important. This topic of civilian defense and peaceful resistance. In a speech that I held several days or weeks ago at the United Nations building in Vienna, I mentioned that this is not only ideology and this is not some dreamful wish, this is a strategy. And I mentioned the study from Erika Canaveff and Maria Stefan. They did extensive research on this peaceful resistance, and that this they show empirically that this is more effective than violent resistance. So I totally get your point, and this is very important.
Yes, more effective, and also more sustainable, less deadly, less fatalities, less costly. So yes, there's a whole load of research. So one of the biggest tasks is to let people know about this, let people know about this and know, of course, there's implications for this with regards to peace and security work, because it means that we don't rely on governments alone. Of course, governments have a role to play, and I can talk about that. But it means a shift in terms of thinking about peace and security work done to local communities or done to ordinary people, instead to think of local people as really the agents, the co-creators, the drivers of that change in collaboration with others. So it requires a real kind of, and I've been writing about this in the book, I think one of the big challenges that we have in the peace field is to move power and to think about how to deal with conflict better. So how do we move away from top-down triangular power structures of ways of thinking and doing and relating in peace building to more circular, decentralized, collaborative, inclusive ideas and ways of thinking about peace and conflict and power and how it's exercised. So these are some of the things we try and grapple with within World Beyond War.
Absolutely, and here I also totally agree with you. Peace negotiations are, I believe the UN, I stated it also at the same speech, that 64% it's more likely that peace negotiations are more stable if civil society is involved in that same peace negotiations, and also if women are part of the peace negotiations. So yeah, these are crucial points, yes, that you mentioned now. Absolutely. In the beginning, you said that you're having younger people and older people in the same classes and in the same, room, talking about war and peace and peace building. I discovered, maybe it's an Austrian or German thing, but in the public events and panel discussions and many other forums of peace, I discovered that there are mostly elderly people, so I believe that peace is something for the older one. I'm not sure if you agree with me. So I'm interested, why is that? Did you observe the same thing?
Yes, to some extent, we do observe that within World Beyond War. And for example, in the course that's just finished, War and the Environment, we heard a lot from, and we had over 100 on that course. I think we heard a lot from our participants. You know, where are the young people? And there was some young people on the course, and they were brilliant, and they did contribute to it, but there was less young people. And if we think about that field, and that was part of the idea of the course and the work that we do, is to try and bring the war, let's say the environmental movement and the peace movement closer together and say, look, we should be working closer together because every moment spent working for peace is a moment in turn spent working for sustainability. We can say, though, that the young people are more active in the environmental movement, you know, than what they are the peace movement. And that's something we've thought a lot about, and we try working a lot to try and address that. How can we try and encourage people, young people in particular, to think through how peace building is important for them, you know, in the present and in the future as well. And what we try to do in World Beyond War is that we try to connect the idea of ending war, and we speak about this in our upcoming book, From a War System to a Peace System, how ending war, how abolishing war is not just essential for achieving a just and sustainable peace, it's essential for achieving progress on all levels, whether it be environmental sustainability, prosperity, addressing the refugee crisis, and there's a number of reasons for that. So, and this will help, hopefully, we think, engage more young people if they're interested in, let's say, economics. You know, the world's spending 2 trillion on preparing for war, you know, and a tiny amount of that is spent on preparing for peace. If the world is interested in climate change, or existential threats such as climate change, AI, and nuclear weapons, all three of them have really, really close links with war. I mean, the link between nuclear weapons and war is, you know, that's very clear. We don't need to speak too much about that. But not as many people know about the link between climate change and war. You know, militaries are the biggest user of fossil fuels, biggest polluters on the planet. You know, if we're interested in climate change, then we have to be interested in and against war. AI, of course, you know, we need to be aware of the runaway. At the moment, it's controlled by humans, but it may not be forever. And, you know, estimations suggest it won't be. And we need to think that AI can be really hugely weaponized. And what we need to think about is how can AI and technology, emerging technologies, be used for peace instead of war. So those are some of the things that we try to do, and we have a program actually called Peace Education and Action for Impact, which is specifically focused at youth, 18 to 35, and since 2021 we've managed to educate, mentor, engage, support to do projects, young people in 19 countries, and we will have this project again. If people are interested and listening, please reach out to us. We will have this project again in September with more young people and more countries. This time we know that it will be Afghanistan will have a country project team. We will have Ghana, Egypt, and we're in conversations with others such as Honduras, India, Pakistan, and others. So far, out of the 19 countries that have been through the project, specifically focused on youth, we've had some of the most really interesting, dangerous, fragile countries everywhere from Venezuela, Iraq, Haiti, South Sudan, Cameroon, right through to Ukraine, Russia, Turkey, Serbia, Ethiopia, so a whole host of countries, and Guernsey as well, right on the border of England. So, like I said, a really, you know, learning laboratory, and maybe this comes back to peace education. People think, if I'm in a peaceful country, does that mean that I don't need to engage, you know, or hear about peace education? And that's an argument that's made. I guess my perspective would be this: conflict is part of everyday life. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just part of everyday life. So what's the challenge? The challenge is, how can we learn skills and abilities and qualities to deal with conflict in productive, non-violent ways versus destructive, violent ways? So if that's the case, then peace education has a role to play. And it's really interesting that all of the world's nations, governments, world leaders, right through to everyday citizens, everyone speaks about the importance of peace. Everyone. You know, of course, in some countries on their own terms, but they speak about peace. Well, why aren't we teaching it then? It's, you know, there's many countries around the world that do not have peace education, especially formally within the constitution or within formal curriculum in schools. You know, so that is part of the work that we try and contribute to, as well as all the brilliant organizations around the world that are doing this to try and inform. And we're working with the Council of Europe on a big, exciting formal recommendation to the Committee of Ministers on Peace Education in the Council of Europe in the 46 member states. So been fortunate to contribute to that, and I'm working on the drafting process now.
Sounds very important. Wish you all the best in this process. Let me jump and change the topic, and then we move on to a little bit more theoretical discussion. I wanted to ask you in the beginning, but then I forgot about how do you define peace. But let's go back to this question a little bit later. I'm curious. I believe we got to know each other a few years ago at the peace conference in Vienna. I believe it was called Ukrainian Peace Conference or something like this. What was your impression back then? I believe it was with several hundred people, few, I believe dozens of international organizations and yeah, a lot of interesting people gathered there. But the media portrayed this event as Russian propaganda, and before the event there was also some sort of a little scandal, because the Austrian, workers union, they how can I say, they canceled the rooms a few days ago before the event. So it was some sort of a scandal. How did you perceive this event? Was it a propaganda event? And yeah, how did you feel at that point with all the Noam Chomsky, I believe Jeffrey Sachs, and many other participants? And yeah.
Yeah, that is what, first of all, it's amazing to see people like yourself and everybody else that was there committed to ending one war, and that is important, that is necessary, and it should focus our attention. What also should focus our attention, even more so, could be argued, is that instead of focusing on the war of the day, and whether that be in Ukraine or whether that be in Israel, Gaza, whether that be in Yemen, is that we focus and broaden our scope to think about the system of war. Okay. So what we need to do is try and mobilize people to use the war of the day as a way of addressing the broader systems, the root causes of issues. And that is not always done. If you think about, for example, many of the world's global frameworks, let's say the Paris Agreement, let's say the Sustainable Development Goals, okay? They're all really interesting, or let's say methodologies, from the Institute for Economics and Peace, the Uppsala, CIPRI, etc. They're all interested and all talk about trying to address the root causes of, let's say, violence, and therefore try to promote peace and development, sustainable development, etc. So Jeffrey Sachs, he talks about part of the goal towards achieving the sustainable development goals would be to try and focus on being more socially inclusive, environmentally sustainable, so those two. They're brilliant frameworks and they add a lot to the field. and there's a blind spot. They all miss the elephant in the room. Not war, but the system of war, but the war machine, the institution of war. None of them, from what I see, they might talk about different parts of the war system. So, for example, arms race, military spending, etc. But they don't in depth look at the system of war and the systems connected to it. So what does that mean? It means that there are world's leading methodologies and frameworks for promoting peace and development, and yet they're not adequately, and of course, you know, that word adequately, we can discuss that, they're not adequately at least naming the war system and then discussing what would it take to dismantle the war system. So going back to the reunion, you know, in Ukraine, that's really, 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 really important to look at ending the war in Ukraine. And it should also be connected to a broader movement that World Beyond War has been at the forefront for the last 10 years around trying to end all wars. And that means the institution of war, the system of war, the organizations that plan for, prepare for, profit from, at the expense of public resources, you know, war and preparations for war around the world. So, for example, on your point about, you know, propaganda, we often get sometimes, you know, people saying to us, because we criticize any country, let's say for example, Ukraine, or any country that uses violence to defend themselves, you know, in no way am I saying that I understand what Ukraine going through, or other countries. I'm not. I cannot, because they are, you know, in their own context and they know best what's going on. What I can say is that we know that, as we spoke about, there's non-violent alternatives which are much more effective. So sometimes when we speak about wanting countries to not use war to address war, so instead use non-violence to address war, you know, people might say to us, you're a Putin lover, or are you saying that Putin is right? No, we think violence on all sides is bad, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Russia. We think that there's much more effective alternatives than using war to address war. We think that there's non-violent alternatives to war instead of using war, and this is what we try to do. So we're against all forms of violence on both sides. So hopefully that gives, you know, a little bit of perspective between the war of the day, which is important and it should end, versus the bigger challenge that the peace field faces, and that many in the peace field, not all, because there's some great work being done, but many in the peace field do not learn about, you know, including myself. And maybe I can talk about this. I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow. I've got a PhD in international conflict analysis. I was pretty studied, and I did not learn about this in my PhD or my Rotary Peace Fellowship until I got to World Beyond War and my eyes were opened. And I can never look at peace work the same now, because there is no way of achieving a lasting and just and sustainable peace if we don't look at the biggest challenge to just and sustainable peace that we have, bar none.
Yeah, now, as you mentioned, also the Rotary Peace Club, we can go into depth also in that fellowship. I'm interested in on that as well. But let us jump back again to the question that I earlier wanted to ask you. How you define peace? As I'm hearing from you, and as I understand, you define peace in a more broader sense, like some sort of Johann Galtung, positive peace. So in my opinion, you define peace like me, for example, that peace is not only the absence of war. It is much more. Am I correct?
Yes, I align with more so Galton's original idea of positive peace, that it specifically talks about, you know, non-violent relationships, non-violence, healthy non-violent relationships with it, which includes the absence of violence, the absence of war, but the presence of you know, certain conditions which promote peace in the short term and the long term. Something in one of the other books, the first book that I wrote, I thought about peace a lot, and I just wrote here, three kind of dimensions to peace. Inner and outer, negative and positive, process and outcome. So the inner part is about, I'm a psychotherapist by training, so I know all about inner peace, you know, this is really necessary. Also, although some will say perhaps it isn't, because I know some people are really good at doing peace activism and not the best at having inner peace with themselves, you know, but my position is a lot of the work that we do in peace building is really about, and I'll use this word here, finding the right balance, having this transformative oscillation between the inner and the outer, the local and the global, the study and the practice, the process and the outcomes. So the inner and outer really means peace with self, peace with others, and peace with the world. You know, if I'm in peace with myself, it might be necessary, some would argue, but it's not sufficient if there's not peace outside. So what we need is peace with self and peace with others. Now, some people might argue that we need to start with peace with self first before trying to influence peace with others. I don't necessarily think that in terms of one comes first and then the other one after. I think it's more of always a kind of iterative process between inner and outer. So the inner and outer work. Like you just said there, there's the ideas of negative and positive peace. And I think of positive peace in the original way in which Galton thought of it. At the same time, I understand how other people think about it, including the Institute for Economics and Peace. I understand that. I align more with Galton's original one because I think it really focuses on the importance of non-violence and the presence of things. Process and outcome. I think this is really, really important as well. So what I mean by this is the way in which we work for peace, our way of being, a way of thinking, a way of relating is just as important as the results that we want to achieve, you know? So the process is really, really important as well. At World Beyond War, we use this idea of pro-peace and anti-war, and I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. And I write about this in our upcoming book, actually, that I think some of the language used within the field around peace is more than the absence of war is quite misleading sometimes because it makes people think that, okay, if I don't focus on trying to end war or addressing war, that means I'm still being effective in the holistic, comprehensive approach to peace building, where ours is no. So what we say is that, yes, peace is more than the absence of war. Peace includes, but takes on more than the absence of war. So it's a little slight kind of change in language, right? But it's quite an important one because it means that people don't say, you know, peace is more than the absence of war. That means war can continue and, you know, we can all be in peace. No, no, no. Peace includes, but takes on more than the absence of war. And of course, when we say the absence of war, we mean the institution of war. So that's one way of thinking about how, you know, we think about it. And if people are interested, you can go on to World Beyond War and put in World Beyond War is pro-peace and anti-war and find how we say that both are necessary and both are important. You know, of course, if we have no war, that does not mean that we have 100% peace. There's still more, you know, pro-social work that needs to go on. But of course, we need war as well, you know, in order to help improve the chances of, you know, achieving many of the things that we want. And one of the things that we write about in the book as well, in the upcoming book, is that ending war will not solve all of the world's problems. It won't. As the famous philosopher, you know, once said, David Dauch, we will always have problems. We've always had problems, and we will continue to have problems in the future. And what we need to do is think through and use our knowledge in ways to address these problems better. So by ending war, it will give us so much more resources to confront the challenges that we have now that we know about, and the challenges in the future that we don't know about. But we will have 2 trillion to spend, you know, on loads of things that we don't, you know, right now on war. We will also have really, really important, and this is one thing that I think people overlook in terms of peace building and war and anti-war work. What's one of the things that we need to make progress on any of the Sustainable Development Goals? Collaboration. And when we have war, what's the idea of war? It's that divides us. You know, it doesn't bring us together. The idea is to divide and dehumanize. That's not really a good source of promoting collaboration. So if we end war, we'd also have better collaboration, better relationships with neighbors. The Institute for Economics and Peace talk about that, etc. More money for human capital, etc. So we will make a case in the book that the case for war abolition is not just important for peace and security, it's important for progress on all levels, and it's also important for humans and planetary survival and for us to thrive as well.
I absolutely love the way you describe all the things. I totally agree. Let us move to the Rotary Peace Fellowship. So maybe can you describe your experience there? What is actually the Rotary Peace Fellowship, and what did you learn, and how can people get there? And yeah, what was your general experience?
Yeah. So the Rotary Peace Fellowship is one of the, I'd probably say the best, one of the best education experiences that I had. So I would fully recommend it to anybody interested in peace and conflict work. So Rotary is one of the largest service and business organizations in the world, and one of their core focuses is to increase goodwill, peace, and understanding. So peace has really been at the core right from the beginning of their work. One of the ways in which they think that they can contribute to peace is by training Rotary Peace Fellows. So these are people either new to the field or that have some experience emerging or experience. Now they have two different Rotary Peace Fellowships. One is where you can get a master's at select universities around the world in peace and conflict or development related areas. So you have Bradford University in the UK, Uppsala in Sweden, ICU in Japan, Queensland in Australia, and Duke in the US. And these are for practitioners starting out. They might have a bit of experience, etc. And it's fully funded by thank you to Rotary. They also have a more senior for people who don't need to have a master's, and a lot of people already have masters who want to take 3 months out to develop their skills or develop their knowledge around peace and conflict. And this is what I did in 2012, because I had a background in peace building and peace and conflict, but I also wanted to learn some new tools, some new techniques and things like this. So I spent 3 months in Thailand, which they no longer have a Rotary Peace Center in Thailand, which is such a shame. I'll just put it out there because I thought it was brilliant. They do have two other peace centers, one in Makerere and another one in Turkey. So people can take 3 months. So with regards to what I learned, it was to a good extent, to what you can do in 3 months. It was a good, I think, now what I know about peace building, it was a good introduction to the fundamentals of peace building work. In addition to the educational part, one of the best things is the networking, the opportunity to get to know other wonderful peace builders in your field. In our class, there was at least 20 of us, and come from all different places around the world, from different backgrounds, everywhere from security sector, education, non-profit, police, etc. So yeah, it was a really rich learning experience. And if any of the Peace Fellow friends are listening in, hello, and love you all, and thank you for all the great work that you all do. And I've been fortunate to stay connected with Rotary ever since, and be involved with many different projects with Rotary. That's the positive thing. And I always have my critical scholar hat on. And at the same time, none of what I learned in the Rotary Peace Fellowship looked at the biggest challenge with regards to peace and security, the war system. None of it did. Like I said, none of my PhD did either, until I got to World Beyond War, where my eyes were opened and I could not look at things the same. So this is what this is why I'm really happy and love doing the stuff that we do at World Beyond War. One, because our team is amazing, and I learn so much from them every day. but two, the people that we work with and learn from on the ground are the real diamonds doing brilliant work all around the world. I learn so much from them. So shout out to the 3,000 plus alumni around the world that have gone through our courses. Thank you for all the amazing work that you do. And World Beyond War, I think I kind of said it in what we spoke about, but tries to differentiate ourselves from other peace building organizations, and we think in at least two ways. One is global in scope, so we have tens of thousands of individuals and organizations from 202 countries and counting that have signed our peace pledge. So we try to address abolish war globally, because we think that needs to be done globally. And of course, we have our local chapter and affiliate work. But the big thing that differentiates ourselves from other organizations is, instead of going after the war of the day, the Ukraine or Gaza, is that we try and address the bigger institution system of war. And that's what we've been interested in right from the beginning.
Absolutely. And as we're talking, people can see under your name worldbeyondwar.org. So people that are listening, and if it sounds interesting, please have a look at the website and enjoy the information there. Also, I wanted to give a big shout out to Eva Czermak. She's our common friend, and she worked for the Caritas in the section for Ukraine. I met her at several, peace conferences, and she talked always in a good manner of you, and she's a big fan of yours, and big shout out to Eva.
Big shout out to you. Well, I'm a big fan of hers also. She's amazing, doing amazing, important work, and I really value her as a professional, but also as a colleague and a friend as well. So she's one of amazing many other Rotary Peace Fellows around the world doing brilliant work.
Yeah, absolutely. And she also had, the statement, I talked to her recently, and she said to me, at these conferences, you always talk about, some deep theories, but where is the practice? Where is the practical side of peace? And she's right. For example, in Austria, in our community, the most of us are peace scholars and not peace practitioners. And so she's, in her critique, she's right. We publish books, we think about peace. That's correct, me, myself included. So I'm, I have to criticize myself at that point. But, it is what it is.
Well, I like, one thing I always find when we speak is that she's a deep thinker, and that's really important for us, to think about things and ask questions. Her field, I think the peace field can learn a lot from, the medical profession. And Galton talks about this himself, and Galton used the medical profession quite a lot as a good example of how peace studies should be, but how it should be, in terms of, we should do the diagnosis work, we should do the prognosis work, but we should also do the therapy as well, And he said, how would you feel I'm paraphrasing now, how would you feel if you went to go and see a doctor and you told him all about your problems, or her all about your problems, and he said, okay, or she said, thank you so much for telling me. And then the patient would go, well, hang on a minute, aren't you going to try and, give me some ideas for action and practice? Oh, no, I'm just here to analyze. I'm just here to study. Now, don't get me wrong, study and thinking and blue sky thinking and research is really, 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 really necessary. And so is putting it into practice as well.
Absolutely, yes. Especially in the field of, conflict analysis. So we need to dig deeper and see the root causes of conflicts. Otherwise, we cannot understand, why do nations go to war, and how are people willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of people. So in order to do that, we need to analyze, to think more abstract, to deconstruct ideology, to deconstruct binary thinking, to deconstruct toxic masculinity and all this stuff. So it is, I'm a big advocate of peace scholar and peace scholars and theory but I understand the critique as well. So I understand both sides. So, but I'm on the academic side of things.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Well, on your point about, the importance of conflict analysis, I often use this if I'm working with students or others, the idea, I think Einstein apparently, although I'm not too sure there's proof of this, but was apparently asked a question. Einstein, if you had 1 hour to save the world, how would you spend your time? And he said, easy. I would spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and then 5 minutes coming up with a solution. Now, this has implications for the peace building field, because what tends to happen is that we have a problem and then we rush and do things without really understanding the problem, which could make things a whole lot worse. So yeah, in none of what I'm saying, trying to advocate for the importance of action, I'm not saying that this is to take away from the important kind of, thinking and scholarly work that needs to take place. I like the idea of, praxis around having this critical, and this critical is important, critical reflection and action at the same time, the iterative process between the two, and how thinking can inform practice and how practice can inform thinking.
Absolutely, yes, this is absolutely correct, yes. And you also earned your PhD in international conflict analysis, so maybe we can also dig deeper into your work. What was your key finding back then, and how did this influence your later thinking and maybe the person that you are now?
Yeah, happy to talk about that, yeah.
So in your analysis, what did, for example, resources play a role, or ideology, or what, in your research?
In my PhD or in general?
In general, but also in your PhD.
Well, so when we're trying to make the case for the importance of peace and trying to make the case for the war abolition, we need both evidence and we need both ethics. And I talk about this in the book as well, that some people are convinced by facts and evidence, so then it's good for those in the peace building field to have the facts and the evidence with regards to what does war cost us, not just humanly, but everywhere from social to geopolitical. It's AI there, put my thumb up. Not just AI, geopolitical, but right through to environmental costs. So it's good to know those. It's also good to know the evidence, the science of non-violence works, or civil resistance, should I say, not just non-violence. Civil resistance and non-violent action works. However, sometimes people are not convinced by facts. Some people are convinced by stories. And so what I try to talk about is that I think we need to get this balance between, evidence and ethics, because some people in the field might be really, really effective at what they do, but what they do is not really ethical. So when we're trying to make decisions about peace building, we should be thinking about, what does the research show? What does the evidence show? And is what we're looking to do, is it appropriate? So, and there's no one way of deciding if it's appropriate, but I think a good indicator is to think about, does this improve lives and improve the planet? Does it move us away? Does it move us closer to life or death? Health or illness? Poverty or prosperity? Dehumanization or humanization? Sustainability or mutually assured destruction? Those are, I think, guidelines that can inform our way of thinking, and research and analysis, like you spoke about, can help us, do that. But what I try to do, and what I try to do still, and what I tried to do even before my PhD, and in all of the work that I've done, I've always tried to mix both study and learning and action. So even with my PhD, and I've never just studied, so my undergrads, my masters, my PhD, I always worked, and mostly full-time alongside, because I really believed in the importance of study and practice. And now I'll just put it out there, there's some brilliant scholars, around the world. I'm not the biggest fan, and this is just my personal opinion, of people just studying, doing an undergrad, master's, and PhD, and then becoming a so-called expert in the area without knowing what happens on the ground. You know, that they might have academic knowledge, and that is one form of expertise. But I really think it's useful for those who wanting to advance a career in whatever area it is, that they have a real grounding and understanding what this knowledge means on the ground. So what I've tried to do all the way throughout my career, and also in the PhD and other places, is try to mix study and action. So I like the methodology, participatory action research a lot. I think it's brilliant because it takes up some of the core challenges that we have in whether it be peace building or other fields. It addresses the gap between study and action because it does both. And the participation part is really, really important because sometimes, even in peace building, but whether it be in education or youth work, my other field or psychotherapy, you know, the other area that I've worked in, sometimes these fields are kind of seen as like, oh, the experts are meant to do the research, you know, the so-called experts, where we're meant to be the recipients. What participatory action research tries to do is to say, we can all be experts, you know, in our own area, and we can do research. And we can actually, rather than relying on Marx said this in 19 such and such, we can develop our own theory. You know, it has to be grounded in the ideas and thinking of others. But I like the idea of action research and participatory action research because it says that we are experts in our own right, and through the work that we do in practice, we can come up and develop our own theories based on the practice. And some of them might contradict what other grand theories might say, but that's okay. So I'm a big proponent of analysis. That's really, really important. And at the same time, it needs to find that balance of being grounded in the needs on the ground. So one of the things that I speak about in the book as well, that we speak about in the book, is I think one of the ways of thinking about the challenges in peace building, but in many other fields, is to find the right balance. And we call for in the book a combination of people-based and system-based approach. We need a people-based and a system-based approach, because sometimes those, for example, in the peace building field, they will talk about, you know, peace with self and peace with others, and you know, being in the classroom and talking and things like this. This is necessary, but it's not sufficient, you know. And then, or others will talk about the big system analysis, you know, and we need, which we'll be more very good at, you know, in terms of looking at the big structures and things like this. But unless it's grounded in the needs on the ground, you know, it's not going to be as effective. So what I think we need to do is find that balance between going to scale and looking at systems without losing touch with the needs on the ground. So trying to get that balance right between people-based approaches and system-based approaches.
I totally get you. But let me play devil's advocate and let me challenge your thought. So, as I believe you can also observe in the UK, maybe I'm wrong, but some sort of a militarization of society, of thinking, and we are getting told that a war is necessary. And here I want to, in this sense, I want to challenge you. So, war is necessary in order to live in a peaceful society. We need to prepare to defend ourselves against tyranny, against dictatorships, against Putin. And let me bring up the key the key argument. For example, it is necessary to go to war against Hitler. For example, imagine we would be all pacifist and peace-loving people, and nobody fought. The Soviet Union lost about 20 million people, defending their freedom against the Third Reich. So, in this sense, pacifism and peace is not only a solution, and maybe there are times where we need to prepare for war. So, would you agree? Would you disagree? And yeah, maybe we can have a debate.
Yeah, good. Yeah, this is something that we often hear a lot. And in one way, it connects to what we speak about in World Beyond War, the myths of war, the myths, so the methodology around war. And there's many, in terms of our war is needed to keep us safe, or increasing military spending will keep us safe. We outline 4 of them, and we do so, and this will be in the book as well, around what we need to know about the war system. So that's the 2nd chapter, what we need to know about the war system. And then one of the things that we need to know is the hardware and the software of the war system. The hardware is the things that we can see, the visible, let's say the structural violence, the institutions, the material things, the weapons, the equipment. But just as important, but actually more subtle, is the software of the system. And this is the language and the myths that we use to think that war is inevitable, necessary, just, and beneficial. So let me respond to all 4 of them, because it, in a way, addresses your really, really good point. And I understand that it comes up, and I think it's a good point to have a good conversation around. So war is inevitable is one of the arguments that's made. We've always had war. And yet, anthropological and archaeological evidence shows we've had war for about 12,000 years, okay? Which is a tiny, 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 tiny amount of human history in comparison to the history of humanity. It's a tiny amount. There's this saying by Kenneth Boulding, which is, he was one of the other fathers of peace studies, along with Galton, along with Elise Boulding as well. Whatever has been is possible. And what he means by that is, well, if we had, we had a world without war for before like 12,000 years ago, it's possible again then. Whatever has been is possible. I know it's very, slight touch, but I think it's a brilliant, powerful kind of way of thinking about things. So evidence, you're talking about analysis, shows that war is not inevitable. It's not inevitable. There's my colleague and executive director, David Swanson, also talks about, which I think is a great way of thinking about it. There's no such thing as war deprivation. People who don't go to war don't get ill because they have not gone to war. There's no such thing as that. The civil statement, on violence, again, scientifically proves that we're not innately violent. It proves that humans have the capacity to both go to war and be violent, and the opposite, to not go to war and be peaceful. So that's the inevitable one. Then the next one is, well, war is necessary. We need, we need war. It's necessary or just. And I think I'll address both of them in this one. But in the chapter we address both of them in turn. One of the big arguments that we all get a lot of the time is, but Hitler's coming, but not Hitler, of course, in the Putin or whatever leader, we always get that. And actually, David Swanson again, and we have a course on it called Leaving World War II Behind. And it says that what happened, World War I, World War II, in many ways, that part of the course and the book shows that it could have been stopped. It could have been ended so much sooner without all those deaths, including, like you just said, about Russia, people don't always know about how many people died in Russia. They know about, in Germany and in Poland and other places, but they don't always hear about Russia, and there's a huge amount, so I thank you for bringing that up, because not a lot of people know about that huge amount of numbers. So it shows how the wars could have been stopped, but then it also makes the case that we're in a different time now. We need to leave World War II behind and not use that idea of Hitler's coming, because what it does is that it tries to justify the massive military spending that we have now, saying Hitler's coming, we need to do this. We're in different times. Okay, arguments still can be made, this, and this, Phill. I understand that, and it's a good place to have debates, but we're in a different time now. We have different needs. There's the famous saying, including by Stephen Hawking, among others, is that intelligence is the ability to adapt. And we need to adapt to different times now. We're in different times. We need different kind of approaches. So people say, is war, if war is necessary and just, then that would basically say that, well, isn't there better alternatives? And then within our chapter around, war is never just and war is never necessary, we say we have over 350 proven non-violent tactics and strategies which have worked much more effective. And actually, within the book as well, and we have a section on non-violent action, the foundation of peace, which talks about non-violence and things like this. But one of the things people don't realize, you kind of touched on it a little bit, is that there's loads of research around the power of non-violent action in terms of bringing about social, economic, political change. Not as many people know about the power of non-violent action to resist and prevent wars, occupations, tyrannies, dictators. World Beyond War, if people are interested, you can go onto our, right now, and it's free, onto our website, type in World Beyond War list, and we will, and you will find a growing list of more than at least 100 cases, historically and contemporary, of how non-violence has been used as an alternative to war instead of war, and basically brings about much more effective, like we said, more sustainable, more inclusive, less fatalities, less costly. And this is the whole focus of the course, which has started yesterday, Unarmed Civilian Defense, to look at that. So it's not, we make the argument, it's never just, it's never necessary. The fourth one is war is beneficial. So people say, but economy, war is good for the economy, war is beneficial. And then what we say in this is that war is beneficial for a slight select few. And this could be arms dealers, political leaders, etc. There's whole industries that are created and profit from war. So it is beneficial for some. We have to acknowledge that. And at the same time, research shows it's a net loss for all. And actually, research shows as well that it's also a net loss for the so-called victors, because you have things like moral injury. Think about the people that are involved in the war system, veterans and things like this. The suicide rates is humongous. It's one of the biggest killers. And this is from the so-called victors, that have won the war. And then when we think about war is beneficial, we need to think who pays and who benefits. Well, who benefits we just spoke about in terms of the arms dealers, and we can list all them as the big five. But who pays? It's us. People don't always recognize that it's tax-paying people that pay. And so then the question is, well, where does the money come from? Well, the governments find the money, and what they do is that they say, even just recently, the NATO General Secretary said, we can take money out of pensions and healthcare and education and put it into the military. Every single dollar or pound or euro or whatever currency that's spent on preparing for war in turn means less for education, healthcare, schools, hospitals, and other urgent needs. So we need to think about this, the cost of war, who it benefits, and at whose expense.
Absolutely. And I visited a lecture where I got told that, for example, the soldiers that are going back now to Russia with post-traumatic stress disorder, they are more violent, they often go to jail, there is domestic violence, femicide, there is, a lot of structural violence, and this makes the society less peaceful and more insecure, and we can argue they are winning the war in Ukraine. So even they are winning, they are losing. So in this sense, you are absolutely right. But maybe we can profit as a nation, for example, if I took the resources, for example, from the other nation. So they have oil, they have gas resources, aluminium, they have lithium, and so we need it for our economy. So I grab it, and my people enjoy the benefit of these resources. We secure the resources. So why not? It's imperialistic, but we've done it for the last 500 years, so why not continue? No, of course I'm joking, but you got the point.
Yeah, well, if you speak about resources, now people say, well, what are the reasons for why did we go to war? And there's lots of different arguments, some around religious and things like this, but a clear, in terms of research, a clear finding shows resources. If countries have oil, if countries have other natural resources, then they're over 100 times more likely to be invaded. So resources is a key contributor, not the only one, and we will never say in World Beyond War that there's often, one reason or two reasons, there's multiple. But if we're looking at research and what it suggests, then resources is a huge factor in terms of whether a country is invaded, or not.
Absolutely, yes. So, dear Phill, I don't have any further question. Did we leave something aside? Did we, should we have to mention something or, yeah.
No, just thank you so much for the conversation, and thank you for the challenging conversation, the questions as well. This is really important, and questions that we often get, and questions that, as peace builders, we should be able to have, like we did, a discussion around this and try to say, well, here is what people say, and here is the counter argument, and here is evidence to support this counter argument. Like we say in the book, and we do in World Beyond War, what we want to do is try and encourage people to make informed decisions, but people don't know about the non-violent alternatives. People don't know about the full costs of war. People don't know about the alternative, the global peace system that's emerging. So part of our work as peace builders, I think, is to try and educate these people around these issues.
Absolutely. So let's recommend one more time the website worldbeyondwar.org. And thank you, dear Phill, for the nice conversation and also for the great debate that we had. And thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thanks so much.